Good afternoon and welcome to today's Compliance Week webcast. I'm Joseph McCafferty, Executive Editor of Compliance Week, and I'll be hosting this afternoon's webcast. Today we're going to be talking about managing risk and compliance requirements in electronic communications. Before we hear from our guests, let me quickly go over the agenda for this afternoon. We're scheduled to go for 1 hour. I'll give a brief introduction and then we'll jump into the presentation, brought to you today along with CA Technologies. The presentation will be followed by a question and answer session. Your questions will be confidential, so don't be shy. You can ask them at any time by using the Ask a Question function on the left-hand side of your screen. I'll pose them to our guests at the end of the presentation. The webcast will also offer CPE credit. To obtain your CPE credit, wait until the webcast is over and I sign off. At that point, a final exam will be presented automatically in a separate window. If for any reason you have trouble viewing the CPE tests or receiving the CPE certificate, just send an email to info@complianceweek.com. A few other administrative details. At any time during the presentation, you can download the slides from the drop-down menu. That's on the left-hand side of your screen. You can also hit the View Slide Full Screen button at the bottom of your screen if you wish to increase the size of the slides. And a Help button is located in the upper right-hand corner of your screen for assistance. Today's webcast is a part of a series that Compliance Week launched a few years ago. We hold these webcasts just about every week, usually on Thursdays. Our guests have been chief compliance and governance officers at leading public companies and experts on various compliance, regulatory, governance, and risk topics. For an upcoming schedule of our webcasts, please visit our website, complianceweek.com, for details on those or to register. Quick word here, if you missed our Conflict Minerals webcast forum that was held in February, those webcasts are now available on demand. I encourage you to go look at those. It was a fantastic series. And also, don't forget to register for Compliance Week's annual conference that we're holding May 19th through the 21st in Washington, D.C. at the lovely Mayflower Hotel. So that's the end of the advertisement here. Let's move into our program. Very happy to have with us Chris Boswell, Senior Principal, Solution Strategy for CA Technologies. Chris has over 13 years of experience developing and implementing security, risk, and compliance solutions. During his tenure at CA, Chris has held a variety of technical and management positions across security services, product management, and sales organizations. Chris's work in governance, risk, and compliance domain has led to several patent filings for CA, and he currently coordinates sales activities for CA Technologies' information protection and control solutions, and works closely with product and development teams on behalf of customers to address emerging security, risk, and compliance challenges. Chris, we're really happy to have you here. Do you want to kick the things off?
Oh, perfect, Joe. Thanks for such a lovely introduction. I'm pleased to be here on a Thursday afternoon or morning, depending on where you're dialing in from. I have a short, brief intro video that we'll go over and then dive right into the content. We have an action-packed hour. Back to you, Joe.
Over the past 3 years, we've seen organizations really begin to embrace social media as a method of communication. Nowhere in the business has its presence been felt greater than in marketing, advertising, and public relations. But despite these gains, email remains by far the dominant medium for day-to-day business communications, and various surveys have suggested that employees can spend as much as 30% of their time each day composing and responding to email. Now, when we think about what can go wrong with email today, people usually think about external threats. These are things like spam, spyware, viruses, phishing attacks, and espionage. Over the next 45 minutes, we'll explore many of the internal threats that are often much more difficult to address. So, for example, these would include things such as inappropriate or offensive content, unauthorized personal use, disclosure of sensitive or confidential information, and nonconformance with regulations. Now we'll focus on these threats because they can have a devastating effect on your business and bottom line, and they directly map to risks you're likely worried about today, including legal liability, regulatory compliance, productivity, data loss and fraud, and reputation.
Okay, so I'd like to start off by, we mentioned and introduced the numbers and different types of threats that face electronic communications today. I start off by looking at some of the headlines. I always find this exercise quite interesting. And looking at trends and what kinds of things are going on via email and how it's impacting organizations today. Many of these, as you can see, are related to inappropriate, disclosure of sensitive or confidential information. You can see a lot of trends just here alone. Nielsen staff are accidentally sending mass email containing employee data. Department of Labor accidentally emailing 4,000 Social Security numbers. Obamacare employee, as if they needed additional bad press, emailing 2,400 Social Security numbers. A lot of this is email being used to support the back office business transactions, and when those processes go wrong, they end up in headlines and can negatively impact your organization's reputation. But there's also other types of things that show up in email. For instance, saw this one over in the UK. Oxford University accidentally sends email to undergraduates naming and shaming the worst performing students. The Navy accidentally emails a reporter plans to deny a FOIA request. And then other types of kind of harmful or inappropriate content that might get out and cause legal troubles. Example of the BET executive was sent some emails about one of their reps showing up at an event looking like a woman. So again, this stuff is out there and happening today in email. We recap that there are basically, from an internal threat perspective, there are 4 primary threat vectors that you're worried about with electronic communications. But then there are those threats can materialize in different types of risk. So, for example, inappropriate or offensive content can wind you up in legal trouble, and it can also cause reputational damage. We don't really think about this very often as compliance directors or risk management directors. Usually these are more HR issues, but sexual, racial, and other forms of harassment can be perpetrated by email. Threats of violence can be between coworkers, can be perpetrated via email, and in some cases, employers could be liable for employee misuse of company email. So, for example, if there were some threats of violence taking place via email, and let's say the employee went to HR and complained about it, and it continued to happen, then the employee and something, let's say, God forbid, something happened between those 2 employees, the employee might have legal grounds to bring a case against their employer for allowing it to take place in the workplace. Loss of product, and again, unauthorized personal use is another potential threat. Usually, you think about this more in years ago. There would be your IT guy that would set up his own business using corporate assets to maintain his own business. Things like this can also happen. Email can also be misused in a similar fashion. But a lot of the focus that we end up seeing is usually on disclosure of sensitive and confidential information. So when this happens, as you saw in the sample emails on the previous slide, you can have not only reputational damage but legal and regulatory compliance issues as well. In fact, according to Verizon's 2013 data breach report, 47,000 plus security incidents, they found that delivery of email and documents was the leading threat vector out of all the incidents that they had looked at. And the last piece is conformance with regulations and compliance mandates. This is something, or nonconformance, excuse me. This is something that could really hurt you as well. There are only 4 states today that don't currently have some sort of breach notification or data privacy law. There are laws, if you're a multinational organization, there are certainly very strong privacy laws in the EU and Canada, and Asia-Pac are developing their own laws, and it's a trend that we expect will continue to go forward in the future as well. So if we look at digging into the compliance requirements a bit more, if we were trying to boil those down into categories, general overall categories, we would say that there are three high-level buckets of compliance that tends to focus on or could impact electronic communications. The first is supervision. And supervision are basically mandates that certain individuals within the organization be monitored for, and their communications be monitored for various types of misconduct. And primarily in the financial world, financial services firms, is where we typically see the term supervision being used most often. But they're, anywhere where there's sensitive data that needs to be safeguarded and protected, there will be individuals that have access to that data and should be monitored as well. That leads us into the second primary category, which we've already mentioned at a high level, was privacy and data loss legislation. And those typically mandate the protection of this type of information, such as electronic protected health information, credit card numbers, social security numbers, things of that nature. They allow for disclosure of that information if the person that owns the information allows it in many cases. And if there is unauthorized disclosure, typically there are breach notification requirements and fines. And then the third piece of legislation is really around records management, or more specifically records retention, which would set guidelines on what types of information organizations in various industries should be holding, and for how long, and when they can dispose of that information. If we take a look at these 3 general buckets, they really impact a broad cross-section of different industries. So, for instance, financial services is heavily regulated. An example of that might be that they have a requirement to monitor communications of registered reps or brokers to prevent unsuitable recommendations. Other kinds of content that financial services firms are supposed to monitor include insider trading, other correspondence with their customers, such as complaints and disputes. On the healthcare side, there's a mandate, HIPAA and HITECH, to protect against unauthorized disclosure of electronic protected health information. Again, email is a channel where that kind of information is often used in transaction support, whether it be something as benign as, I need your social security number to process that claim, or here's give me your email address so I can send you your updated files. Pharmaceutical industry, they have requirements to monitor for off-label use of prescription drugs. So if you're an organization and you've created a new drug that fights fungus on toenails, and it has the byproduct of turning your hair brown, and they go out and market it as a drug that can reduce the signs of aging, that would be something that the FDA would be interested in monitoring and shutting down. Utilities, oil and gas is another industry that these organizations typically have content that could be of competitive nature to their competitors. For example, applications for new drill sites, or they have engineering diagrams, or if you're natural gas, the chemicals that you use in your fracking products would probably be of interest to more than one individual if it were leaked. And so there's a need to protect this information. There are also government requirements to keep certain protected information from being exported to foreign nationals. This is the ITAR or EAR regulations. And again, these types of diagrams and information could flow out very easily via email, either maliciously or inadvertently. And finally, manufacturing retail, focusing on preventing unauthorized disclosure of sensitive non-public information. This could include anything from patents to source code to price lists, typically focusing on things that are transactional in nature. Think about online retail and retail businesses. Think about the Target breach and protecting customer credit card information and things like that. So there are a number of regulatory requirements that span various industries, and you need, a lot of these issues that we're talking about could be perpetrated in email. So again, that's something to keep your mind on. So I think at this point I'm going to stop, and we'll have a quick survey for you folks out there to tell us what you feel are the most prominent risks or threats that keep you awake at night. So the question is, which threat associated with electronic communications do you feel poses the greatest risk to your organization? Okay. Get some results still coming in. I'm just going to stop here, and results going to come in. Let's send those results, if they're fairly out there, to the audience, and so they can see them. It's looking right now that the disclosure of sensitive information has about 75%. Nonconformance with regulations is about 23%. And that's certainly good feedback to keep our minds on as we move through the presentation. So we talked a little bit about the landscape, the threats that are out there, and the reasons why we need to be monitoring electronic communications. Now we're going to shift gears slightly and talk about what organizations are actually doing today to mitigate these threats and manage this risk. So I used to be an IT auditor with a couple of Big Four firms in a past life, and I would evaluate the effectiveness and design of controls and then test those controls. When we're looking at what organizations are typically doing around email today, they might have some policy procedures in place. They might have some awareness training in place. These are mainly administrative controls, and they're designed to be preventive in nature, but there's nothing that really automates that. So from my perspective, they're rather weak controls. So they may be designed to influence and promote end-user behavior and provide guidance on what to do with email and social media, et cetera. But there's no technical means to actually prevent them from doing it. There are some technical tools being used by organizations today, things such as e-discovery tools and data loss prevention tools. So these are more technical in nature. For the most part, e-discovery solutions are detective, they're not preventive, and they're not necessarily designed for continuous monitoring. So they just don't have workflow and things like that set up to capture some of these risks that we're talking about. Data loss prevention solutions are technical controls. They can be preventive or detective in nature, depending on the objective of the organization. I see many organizations using DLP solutions in monitor-only mode and not necessarily using some of the more preventive capabilities. But there are limitations to how these tools are often deployed that preclude them from being of much use to some of the threats that we're talking about. And a good example of that would be monitoring for some of this HR activity, behavioral things, interoffice relationships, racial or age discrimination, those types of things. DLP solutions typically aren't deployed to look at. So let's jump the gun a little bit and talk about what opportunities for improvement. So if they have primarily administrative and detective controls in place, what are we really talking about here? Well, we're talking about the primary opportunity for improvement here is to establish a process going forward where you can continuously monitor or supervise electronic communications. Once you set that process in place, you have the people and processes in place to do that. You'll need to obviously have some technology that will support your monitoring strategy and automate those administrative policies that you have in place. And we'll talk about that in a bit more detail. You'll need to, you're really talking about building a new supervision process, but you already have within your organization likely a legal hold and other compliance processes. So you want to ensure that all of your electronic communications that are being archived are relevant. So for instance, today you might be just doing email, but you may need to consider whether other types of communications and messaging should be included, such as instant messaging, social networks, et cetera, et cetera. And because you're building a new process, you need to integrate that process with your current e-discovery and records management processes. And you already have security processes in place that are monitoring network traffic and other things. And it would be nice if this new supervision process integrated in with that process as well to provide better governance of your program. So let's jump into when we talk about creating a sustainable continuous monitoring or surveillance program. We're really talking about three things, three primary core capabilities. One, you need to be able to detect sensitive content or content that's relative to your business. So if you are an engineering organization and you're worried about your design diagrams, your CAD diagrams, et cetera, you need to be able to detect and track that kind of information. Once you've detected information, you need to be able to control it. So that's to prevent the types of threats and risks that we've been talking about and minimize exposure. And then finally, if you've got some technical measures that are finding content, finding users who are using or maybe misusing this content, then you need to have a mechanism to review these activities, escalate them up to management, make sure the appropriate remediation is taking place, course correct your program, update your user awareness training, update your policies. It's a cycle that continues on and on and on. So you need these three elements in order to have an effective supervision program. So let's talk a little bit about some upfront. If you're setting out, you don't have a supervision program today, and you're looking at building one out. So what are some of the scoping and planning considerations you should have? So for example, first thing you need to think about is what threats and risks are we most concerned with? Well, I've given you a couple to think about upfront: inappropriate offensive content, unauthorized personal use, disclosure of sensitive information, nonconformance with regulations. If you're primarily worried about PCI and compliance or credit card numbers or social security numbers getting out, and that's your core data, then that data is really easy to detect. If your risks and threats that you're worried about are more behavioral in nature, or you have some requirements to monitor, prevent insider trading or bribery, if you're doing business in a foreign country, so Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, then you need to understand that up front and realize that and adjust your staffing and your procedures and policies and your technology accordingly. So once you've determined what the threats and risks and data you're really going to focus on, what users are probably handling those data. So are we going to be focusing on just everybody? Are we going to have a very, very wide and broad control, or is our surveillance and supervision going to be focusing on specific individuals? So if we're worried about source code, it might be programmers. If we're worrying about some of our competition getting out, it might be R&D, researchers. It could be traders, brokers. If it's price lists, it might be some of the sales guys, or it might be contractors. So again, these are things you need to think about. What kind of data, who's probably handling them, so we can have an effective program out of the gate. Next is what types of communications. So is it just email, or is it instant messaging? Is it other special chat programs? If you're in financial service, for example, you might use Reuters and Bloomberg to facilitate transaction processing. You might, if it's sales related, you might have like Salesforce Chatter or something like that. And you might have, if you're worried about customer complaints or things like that, and how people might respond to customer complaints, then you might be interested in bringing in social networking content into your supervision program as well. And then finally, how visible do you want this program to be? Are you okay with silently monitoring, or do you want the controls that you have in place to actually provide guidance on how to use information? So providing some warning and blocking capabilities. These are all things to think about from a process perspective, from objectives. What's the goal and objective of a program? Once you understand what the goals and objectives are and what the scope's going to be, you do need to have a solution that will enable you to basically automate and enforce your policies around that scope. So you ultimately would be looking for some technology that had the content and out of the box have the capability to find content that's relevant to your business out of the box. So don't go looking at vendors who are very strong in financial services if you are a healthcare company. Don't go looking for, et cetera, et cetera. You can, that's just an example. The ability to expect hundreds of file formats. Again, if you're worried about your engineering and diagrams and CAD drawings and things like that, you need to make sure the technology has the ability to recognize that data and either fingerprint it or pop open the files and expect the content, be able to track that content and control it effectively. Again, you're looking for, these are the types of things you need to be looking for from a technology perspective. You may have very simple requirements. I'm worried about Social Security numbers. I'm worried about credit card numbers. Or you may have more, you may actually have to monitor internal communications. I need to establish ethical walls between this group and that group and really monitor what these people within my organization are doing to maintain compliance. So you might have to have some more advanced detection capabilities in order to do that, such as the ability to look at who the users are that were sending it, whether they are a U.S. citizen or not, whether they've been trained in this program or that program or not. There's all sorts of things we hear from our customers that they want to do that's outside of the realm of just detecting content, but taking into context who the people are that are sending the messages and who are receiving the messages. And then finally, from a deployment perspective, you need to figure out how, what are we monitoring here? We know the data we're monitoring. We know the customer's monitoring. How are they communicating? Are they using desktops, laptops? Are they using Outlook Web Agent? Are they using tablets, mobile phones? And you need to make sure if you're going to provide inspection capabilities over these technologies that you have a capability that will track all of these mediums. And again, we've talked a little bit about internal versus external messaging. Maybe you are just worried about basic exfiltration and bad things getting out to the public or getting out to reporters, or et cetera, et cetera. Or you may have more nuanced requirements that need to do some internal monitoring. So again, the technology will need to support that. As you start building out and tuning these technologies, there's going to be some noise or chatter. So there's a process by which you try to filter that out. So one of the things you think about is how easily can this solution filter out unwanted noise so that we're really targeting the high-risk communications, and there's not a big lag between the time someone said something and the time we're looking at it to determine what the impact was to the organization. The ability, maybe you use encryption technologies, and encryption technologies, if you're encrypting everything in the email, you might need to consider some technology that will allow you to inspect that content before it gets encrypted so you can supervise it properly so that your users aren't actually using your encryption against you to bypass surveillance capabilities. And then finally, probably one of the most important aspects is to make sure that your solution has the ability to actually not just notify you when things are going on, but maybe provide guidance to the users, to provide more proactive control, to control how that content is being used within your organization. So when we talk about control, which is very, very important in a supervision program, we're really talking about three basic things. One is the sending and receiving of information. You ultimately, when we compare some of you think about the slide I had earlier where we were talking about tools that organizations have in place, like e-discovery. E-discovery is you're discovering it after the fact. Wouldn't you rather be able to prevent or provide guidance to the end user that they're doing something that is placing your organization at risk and give them the opportunity to respond to that by not engaging in that activity that's going to be risky. So when we talk about sending and receiving, we're talking about real time. We're talking about having a variety of different responses to take once that content is detected, whether it's quarantining, blocking, warning, providing some additional justification. Maybe it's encrypting. Maybe you do want them to be able to do this, but you would like for them to encrypt that communication so that it would be more secure to prevent unauthorized access or exfiltration. And then finally, if you do, depending on the types of remediation you take, It can provide kind of ongoing user education and support to augment what you may be doing on a quarterly or annual basis from a security awareness training. On the archiving side, once the message is sent, if you're inspecting the content and you know that the content is attorney-client privilege, you would, in a perfect world, you would tag that message as being attorney-client privilege so that downstream, when it shows up in the archive and people are creating cases 6 to 18 months from now, that they can take a look at the case and easily identify messages that might be attorney-client privilege so they can exclude those from the final legal matter that's being turned over to the third party. And again, also if you're tagging information, it might be nice to use those tags to defend your disposition strategy from a retention perspective. So maybe you have certain types of content that are transaction support related, like credit cards and things like that. Maybe you have a policy in place to delete that after 30 days, and you don't want that information laying around the archive for 5 years or 7 years or 13 years. So again, these are the types of things I'm talking about when I mention control. So you may say, but Chris, you talked about data loss prevention. I think our security team may be doing some of this stuff already. Okay, so let's talk about that. So in this picture here, you've got two sets of users that are inside, two groups of users that are in the internal network. You have this little arc here representing the internal boundary, and then you have three gateway appliances that your security folks have put at your boundary to protect the organization. Now, as we mentioned at the very beginning in the video, the primary threats that the security folks are worried about is, the external threats. So first of all, they're going to have their messaging security gateways that are looking for viruses, malware, and phishing. But then they also may have some basic capabilities to block people from doing stupid things like sending social security numbers or credit card numbers outside the organization. The way that these appliances are deployed at the network will not capture internal communications between one group to the other. And this may be relevant for maintaining compliance with regulations. So for instance, if you have Group A not supposed to be sending trade research to Group B before the trades, aka insider trading, then you might need some more controls in place to do that. Again, another example of this internal communication would be threats of violence and sexual harassment, age discrimination, etc. Again, none of the way that security folks deploy these solutions today, in many cases, is scoping out purposefully because it's difficult to manage all of this internal chatter. It's difficult to get your arms around what your employees are doing internally. It's a lot easier to just deploy a network-based appliance and call it a day. The other thing that you think about the other aspect to consider is you've got a network-based appliance, but you also have all these users that are have their own devices and tablets that are your employees that are using social media. And again, depending on what the design of your supervision program is, what threats you're worried about. If you're worried about your users going out and doing something in social media, for example, Hawaii, there was an incident not too long ago. A man in Hawaii is suing Hertz because the employees got out on social media and started making some racial comments about him. And so now he found out about it. I don't know how, but it was on Facebook. He found out about it, is now suing them. So if those are the kinds of threats you're worried about, then the traditional model where you're using these battery appliances, DLP and message gateway solutions simply aren't deployed to handle this internal chatter and things that are going on outside the network in third-party social media solutions. So I think a lot of organizations are realizing this, and what they're doing to address this is a few things. So they realize that they have people are using company-based laptops and desktops to do some of this internal chatter. So they're starting to think about installing agents on these desktops. And what that does is as someone is generating the message, they're capturing it, at the point of inception, and they're determining whether or not it should ever leave the desktop. So in other words, they're not letting it cross the boundary appliance or stopping it right on the desktop itself. You look here on the right-hand side, we have an employee and a contractor that are outside the network. Maybe they're at a Starbucks or they're at home, and they're using mobile devices and tablets. So if you have a strategy that's focusing on an agent being deployed on an endpoint, well, these types of agents can't today, technology limitation, cannot be deployed on, you typically don't have the ability to deploy an agent on a contractor's laptop who works in another firm or an iPad or an iPhone. It's just, those are closed systems, and the DLP technology doesn't deploy at the endpoint like that. So the risk is that Mary sends Joe, and both of these folks have, let's say I work for CA, they both have CA addresses internally. Mary sends Joe some messages of some content, and Joe's really an external contractor. That message never really goes out to the boundary appliance to be inspected. It's processed from one inbox to another inbox, but now Joe has access to some sensitive information he shouldn't have access to. So in order to mitigate this threat, organizations are realizing that, hey, maybe I shouldn't apply this control out of the boundary appliance. Maybe I should apply the control actually on the message server itself and deploy agents that will inspect the content, no matter if it's on an iPad or an iPhone or an Android device, or it's a contractor using an external computer, getting over Outlook Web Agent, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a good strategy that organizations are starting to wise up to. It's more effective than your traditional security controls. But then the last piece is that organizations are starting to realize is there's been a new crop of social media moderation tools or social media engagement tools, depending on how their marketing folks want to spend it. So examples would be Actian, Hootsuite, Socialware. And these are third-party solutions that allow corporations to control the types of messages that are being sent out via social media. So you would log onto this platform. The organization would provide you templates. Hey, we've got this new advertising campaign going on. Send this out to all your customers, and you can really control and monitor what's being posted. Some of them have like an approval process or approval queue. You get to look at the content before it gets sent out, and that's an effective way to manage the kind of communications that might be happening outside of your network. So again, there's not a panacea for this, but there are things that people are trying to do. So that service is outside of your network. So organizations are saying, well, I need to archive all of that communications from a legal hold perspective, depending on the industry I'm in. So I'm going to set up agents at the point of archival, and we're going to get feeds of all this data from our mail servers and from these social media moderating companies, and we're going to do the inspection for compliance and everything else at the archive level. So again, this is I bring this to your attention because there are things that organizations are doing today. We mentioned e-discovery, we mentioned data loss prevention, and then there are reasons why the same old paradigm is not effective for the risks that are out there going forward. So we've been talking about control. I'll give you an example of a real-time control. I have this Mike Barton as the Vice President of Fixed Income Division. He's sending John Smith an email. And, hey, John, we're about to start coverage on Acme this afternoon. I got Spire about to close this deal. Can you hold off on your release for 24 hours? By the way, I won't tell anybody. Well, in a traditional solution, you might be looking for some keywords like I won't tell anyone or whatever your Urban Dictionary says on the down low, or people get really creative with these things, and you should do that. But you also want to take into account the context in which it was sent. So someone saying, I won't tell anyone about your surprise party would be an example of noise that you might have to look at. But if you say, I won't tell anyone about this deal that we're about to do, then that's obviously some additional context. So you want to be able to not only do basic keyword searches, but also look at the context. Who's sending the message? Who's it being sent to? Do you have rules restricting people within certain departments talking to other departments within certain times of the month? These are all things that you can manage with an effective supervision solution. And then you might also say, well, okay, I get the security things, and thanks for explaining that to me. I'll go back and talk to my security folks about what we're actually doing there. And I thought I also heard that maybe our records management team is doing some of the supervision stuff already. So this is an example, and I guess on the records management side, there's different and varying levels of maturity. So most organizations have an archive in place, and they're archiving some basic email for retention purposes. They may outsource e-discovery, or they may do e-discovery in-house. But one of the first things we talk about, let's go back to building the program, is whether the types of communications are complete and adequate for the scope that you want to be monitoring. So, for example, are you doing email, public IM, OCS link, social media? Outside of the basic archive, organizations can be doing a lot more things on top of that content, including e-discovery, analytics, retention, disposal, and supervision. And so I guess my comment to you is to go back to your organization and find out what they're doing today, because they may have some of the capabilities in place, but there may be some gaps and some opportunities to improve by deploying additional technology. And with that, I think we're going to stop and take a second survey real quick, a little break in the action. And we'll start that survey. And so this survey was designed to determine basically what level of maturity you folks have out there from a perspective of records management, e-discovery, and archiving, because it does vary quite. And we'll come back to those results. I'll move on to the next content. So I mentioned that on the e-discovery and archiving side of the house, there are some organizations that have to do supervision of this and have had to. Financial services certainly are as an example of an industry that, depending on the types of activities you're engaged in, broker-dealer, you have to have certain users, brokers and dealers, registered representatives that are monitored. You have to do some kind of supervision today. So we'll take a look at those tools. I've put together a quick report card that will grade out those types of tools today and how they're really geared to manage the threats that we've been talking about on this call. So if you're doing supervision from an archive, the nice thing about it, we talk about the three tenets: detect, control, and review. From a detection perspective, we'll give them a grade of a B-. And that's because while they see all of the internal and external communications, that's great. Their detection engines are really more hot word or keyword based, and they lack a lot of the sophisticated capabilities to really filter out noise and unwanted content. If you look at the control perspective, if you're supervising off the archive alone, there's really, the message has already been sent. So whatever risk that message caused the organization, only thing that you can do at this point is minimize the impact, right? So you're in containment mode at that point. Most organizations, they have the e-discovery tools that they might be using on the detection side really can't help you on the control piece. And then finally, on the review component, we mentioned that you want to have a solution in place that will show what you're detecting, what you're controlling, what the actions that we're taking, whether people were disregarding your warnings or heeding your warnings. You want to be able to monitor trends over time. E-discovery tools do have an ability to basically look and search inside emails and find things that are bad. They can do this today, and you use them to support your legal hold process. However, they were not built to do continuous monitoring where you might be processing 1 million emails a day or 5 million emails a day, and you need to have 30 or 40 people looking at this email. This is a workflow and a process e-discovery tools were not really geared to support. So they make for poor technology for ongoing supervision. And a lot of the tools also don't really support robust security models. So if you wanted to set this up so where your HR director only saw HR behavior-related violations and your security officer only dealt with PCI-related violations because he is the compliance program for PCI, traditional supervision solutions don't necessarily support those kinds of deployments and rollouts. So at this point, I would be remiss if we've talked about the risks associated with electronic communications. We've talked about the what organizations are doing today. We've talked about what organizations should and could be doing. I would be remiss if I did not let you know that there is technology today that can address all of these risks that we've been talking about and that can help you manage and mitigate these risks more effectively going forward. So we at CA, we have our own solution. We've been providing email supervision to customers for well over a decade. Supervision solutions should be purpose-built for this process. So, for example, this is in a screenshot. If you have the ability to control what users are doing, you might want to see if people are heeding your warnings or disregarding your warnings. I mentioned that earlier. So you want to see if you're looking at an email, you want to see if this was something that could cause risk to our organization, something bad. I want to see. We applied an intervention. I want to see what the user did and how they responded to it. I want to be able to jump in really quickly and identify, why this information was flagged. In this case, it's related to an insurance claim. It looks like there's some EPHI that was flagged. We want to make it very easy for the reviewer because, again, there's a lot of email being sent. I want to make it very easy and streamlined for the reviewer to get in, see what's been escalated, look at the history, and take appropriate action. Supervision solutions should also, and we provide this, should also provide a number of flexible remediation capabilities, ability to monitor, block, warn, quarantine. They should be able to integrate in with your existing security that you may have. Maybe you're using rights management. Maybe you're using encryption technologies. These are things that your supervision solution should be able to do. And then finally, we're happy to announce that we have integrated our solution with our partner IBM. So we've been talking about building this new process called supervision, but you already have records management process in place where you're setting your retention schedules globally for all of your data that are records. You have your legal holds process in place where you're doing e-discovery. Your supervision tool, if you're inspecting the content way before these processes happen, your supervision tool should be able to interact with these processes. The objective is not to create more compliance islands within your organization. And this screenshot shows some of the violation activity that we found that's showing up in a legal hold that might have occurred, from content 18 months ago. So again, we had, perhaps some of these messages were reviewed, perhaps there were some notes, perhaps there's some context in the supervision solution that may lead credence to what's going on from a legal hold perspective. Or it could be just as easy. It could be just as simple as, like I mentioned earlier, you have attorney-client privilege information, and you need to filter that out and not provide that to a third party. That could be quite expensive and time-consuming depending on the nature of the legal hold. So with that, I want to turn over the mic to Clint Maddox. Clint is a VP at CA, or Global Accounts, and he's responsible for all the great things that we're doing with IBM. And Clint, I'm just going to turn over the mic and have you say a few words about what we're doing with our partners.
Thanks, Chris. I really appreciate it. And thanks, everyone, for attending today. As Chris mentioned, I'm responsible for the IBM relationship at CA globally. And CA and IBM have a large-scale partnership that comes across many different product lines, but we're very excited about this particular offering. We partner in many global accounts as well as mid-market accounts. In this, we are focused on, integrating our supervision with IBM's broader platform. But the main thing to take away is that IBM is CA's largest customer and partner, and we are IBM's largest software partner. So you're talking about a relationship with global scale that can be leveraged to support your individual needs. The offering that we put in place with IBM is called Email Control for the Enterprise. So it addresses the types of risk as well as the best practices from a capability perspective that Chris has reviewed with you. But we're tightly integrating with IBM's broader suite of capabilities, specifically in dealing with e-discovery, analytics, disposal, specifically defensible disposal, and overall value-based archiving, so that we're managing our risk, we're managing to our retention policies, but we are also deleting and disposing responsibly of information that we no longer need to keep, because it's a balance between managing compliance and risk as well as managing cost in terms of the data that we can responsibly dispose of. And then we play the role of supervision as a part of their overall set of capabilities. If you look on this chart, just a little bit of information about how you can contact me or Mark Martin, who is the Global Offering Manager at IBM. And again, we're very pleased to have you with us today, and thank Chris for the information that he shared. At this time, I'll pass it back to Joe to wrap it up and take some Q&A.
Well, thank you very much, Clint. Thanks for a fantastic presentation. Again, that was Chris Broswell, Senior Principal, Solution Strategy at CA Technologies, and Clint Maddox, Vice President of Global Accounts at CA. Quick note here, if you'd like a copy of the slides just presented, you can download those from the drop-down menu on the bottom left-hand side of your screen. I think we do have a few minutes to take some of your questions. Chris, I wanted to start with one of mine, and I really wanted to just have you address this explosion of formats and ways for people to communicate with each other, both inside and outside the office. What I'm kind of alluding to is there used to be, most folks use a telephone, and then email came around, and then we had instant messaging, and now people are kind of on their cell phones and their computers at their desks back and forth. And now we're seeing all these applications that have communication tools built into them. Someone mentioned even just like Words with Friends, you could be on that talking to somebody. It could even maybe be a client. How do you get your arms around that? How do you, I'm going to guess that this is only going to continue more and different ways to communicate with each other. As an organization, when I want to police those communications, how can I get my arms around that?
I think that's a great question. And again, it goes back to the risks that you're really, the risks are out there. You're not going to be able to mitigate all the risks. If it's regulatory compliance, for instance, it's all about setting boundaries. So we have customers that have covered individuals that they need to monitor, and what they're doing is they're taking messages from the voice over IP systems, for instance. We didn't really talk about this, but they're taking that information and putting it into archives, in some cases transcribing it. If it's social media information, they're going out and employing third parties that do the social mediation tools. They're bringing that type of information into the archive so that they can get some of these things you're kind of relegated to just doing because of the technology, the limitations of technology. Some of them you can only do post-send review. So there's nothing commercial out on the market today, for instance, that will, unless you're the NSA, that will flag you in real time about what someone's talking about over a phone. So again, a lot of that's done by taking those archives or taking those logs and calls and putting them into the archive. Same with instant messaging. Although certain technology like instant messaging and email, the technology exists to do more preventive actions. But again, some of the things, you really need to do a lot of upfront understanding of what the scope is, what's the risk of not including certain types of communication in scope, and whether the cost is worth the benefit. Right? If you don't have a regulatory requirement to do it, then you're really it's on you as an organization. What are our policies going to be? How do we want to enforce that policy?
I know that this is obviously a big deal within financial services, and the regulations are much stricter about what kinds of communications need to be recorded, what needs to be kept. Is there applications outside of financial services? Is this something I need to worry about if I'm, say, a pharmaceutical company? Could you talk a little bit about that? And then kind of a related question is, I know that the European Union is working on a data privacy bill that's a little more stringent than the one that exists already. Is that something I should keep my eye on?
Yeah, I guess the regulatory landscape is constantly changing, and I think it's only a matter of time before you have the federal government step in. And it's kind of ridiculous at the point that all the states are doing their own thing, and they have their. It's really a challenge if you're working across multiple states today to comply with all of the different breach notification requirements without some sort of federal overlay. I will say the
My
term
understanding is that there's 26 different states that have their own breach notification laws in place.
There's only 4 that don't at this point.
Okay.
And then there are in Kentucky and a few others have some bills in the House right now. But the term supervision means things in different. We don't get caught up on the terminology. We're really talking about continuous monitoring of electronic communications. The term supervision, the financial services has been around and they've been doing it the longest. But the term supervision means something different in the public sector. It means something different in healthcare. But again, some pharmaceuticals, it's kind of a gray area. The FDA has levied massive fines to pharmaceutical companies that have been caught doing this. But to the extent that the FDA has, rigid audit guidelines and are specifically looking for this stuff or have techniques to go in and audit technology to find this, not every industry is there to the level of financial services is. But again, the whole point of this discussion was these threats are out there. I showed you some examples of where this is showing up in the press. It doesn't necessarily have to be a regulatory issue. Again, I think 75% of the respondents said, I don't care if it's a regulatory issue or not. I have sensitive data, and I need to make sure that it's not going out via email.
Chris, there are a couple of very specific questions here about the CA offering that I wanted to get to. Someone's asking, can the CA product work with users in multiple languages?
Yes, CA, we do. We have organizations that are using, large multinationals that are using our product, and we have the ability to detect double-byte encoded characters. So if you've got glyphs, and maybe in Asia, some of those languages that, and you want to build policies to detect certain types of misconduct or communications via email, you could do that. We also can set up certain policies so that even an interactive warnings show up in different languages as well. So we do support that. Customers who are doing that today.
Fantastic. And then another very specific question here. We have IBM FileNet products. Will this work with what we have?
Absolutely. So part of the way we've integrated is if you're using FileNet and it's going into your archive, we're expecting everything going into the archive. So absolutely, we support those folks wholeheartedly.
We have just a couple minutes here, and I wanted to just kind of ask you to take us out 2 or 3 years. What are we going to be looking at? And one of the things that I was hoping you could focus a little bit on social media. It seems like that is becoming more intertwined with what we're doing, and even in the workplace, well beyond Facebook and LinkedIn where we started. And people are using Twitter more to communicate and using it at work. I'm going to guess that we're going to see much more of this rather than less.
I think you absolutely will see much more of it. Again, a lot of the things that we've shown in the stuff that shows up in the press has been, emails being sent that's related to back office transactional support. I needed to get this benefits enrollment spreadsheet to someone. I sent it to the wrong person, or there was another example of the Five Guys recently. A customer complained. He replied to him calling the customer a jerk, and that got up in the media. A lot of that type of stuff, like handling customer complaints, you're going to see a lot more corporations monitoring for those types of issues in social media. But you're not, there's still going to be a lot of things going on in email that will continue. You're not going to use Facebook or Twitter to support back office processes, right? And so I think you will see a lot greater number of emerging risks and a greater need in organizations trying to control the message that they're sending out to their users, because everybody's crowdsourcing everything at this point. But there's still going to be there's going to continue to be a large amount of risk over email just because it's used to support so many processes.
I see. Well, I think we're out of time, so we're going to have to leave it here. Thanks very much for a really informative session here. Again, everyone, our speakers today, Chris Boswell, Senior Principal Solution Strategy at CA Technologies, and Clint Maddox. He is Vice President of Global Accounts at CA Technologies. And a special thank you to CA Technologies for making this webcast possible today. We certainly appreciate their partnership. The webcast has been recorded. It'll be available sometime in the next day or two. CPE credit is available for our archive webcast, so I encourage you all to check those out on our on-demand CPE library. You can find those under the webcast tab at our website, complianceweek.com. And again, to attain your CPE credit, I'll finish this wrap-up shortly, and at that point the webcast will close automatically, and that exam will be presented in a separate window. Quick note here, if you have pop-up blockers, you might want to disable those. It could get in the way of seeing that test. If you have any trouble viewing the test or getting the certificate, just send us an email. You can find us at info@complianceweek.com. This concludes our webcast. I want to thank everyone for joining us today, and have a great afternoon. Thank you.